Oh, hello. I'm Eric Metaxas with Liberty University. Speaking of liberty, what is liberty? Also called freedom, is really what we say when we mean self-government. Now, in the history of the world, no one had ever governed themselves, no nation, no people, ever until 1776. And so why in the world did self-government suddenly pop up and, as we now know, flourish for almost 2.5 centuries? What was it that took place in 1776? It kind of makes no sense. Why was this not possible before America came into being? We have to really understand the preposterous idea of self-government. In other words, there's a very good reason people had not governed themselves, because it's essentially impossible. People do what they want. Usually the strongest person, the person with the biggest gun or the most power, takes control and rules and governs those under him. And if it's a decent ruler, things are okay. If he's not a decent ruler, things are miserable. That's kind of the history of mankind in a nutshell. And then suddenly in the 18th century, Americans came up with this idea, the wild idea of liberty that had never been done before, and we can't take it for granted because it's so fragile and so crazy, it really shouldn't exist at all. So what was it that made them think they could pull it off? Well, leaving the Constitutional Convention, because we know that, 1776 we declare we're the United States of America, we fight, we win 1783, but in the 4 years between 1783 and 1787, things weren't working so well, so they go back to the drawing board in Independence Hall in Philadelphia. They, meaning Ben Franklin and Washington and the gang of founders, and they say, can we create a government that works, where people govern themselves? Never been done before. Can we do it? And the answer, in a nutshell, should be no. To cut to the chase, they do it. Benjamin Franklin leaves Constitutional Convention. This is at the end of 100 days. They're done. And a woman, Mrs. Powell of Philadelphia, says, "What have you given us, Dr. Franklin, a monarchy or a republic?" They honestly didn't know if it was possible. Maybe they'd end up with like a soft monarchy or something along those lines. Well, no. He looks at the woman, Mrs. Powell, and he says, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." That's the key. If we want self-government, we have to govern ourselves. Can we do it? If we're free, if we're genuinely self-governing, then it cannot be coerced. There can be no real force involved. So there's a conundrum, and here is how it works. I learned this from Os Guinness. He calls it the golden triangle of freedom. The golden triangle of freedom is that freedom requires virtue, virtue requires faith, but then faith in turn requires freedom, which requires virtue, which round and round it goes. Okay, so freedom requires virtue. A lot of times you hear people say like, hey, freedom is awesome, liberty and faith, they go together, freedom and faith, and you think, but why? Because to be truly free, you must govern yourself. And the question is, why would you govern yourself freely without being forced? Well, it would be because you have to have virtue. All of the founders, every one of them understood this idea, that this crazy idea that had never been done before of liberty, self-government, couldn't work unless you have a virtuous people who will govern themselves when nobody's pointing a gun at them, nobody's threatening them. They'll do the right thing on their own. Why? Because they have virtue, because they answer to a higher authority. Real virtue coming from real faith must be free. The people have to choose it of their own accord, and we can't force freedom. So it's an amazing thing. And they said what we have to do is we have to teach people this idea, and we have to encourage faith. But we can't force it by government, but we have to encourage a culture of faith. So when Franklin comes out of Independence Hall and the woman says to him, "What are you giving us, a republic or a monarchy?" He says, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." And it is something of a miracle that for almost 2.5 centuries we have kept it. We are on the very verge of ceasing to keep it, because a piece of this, a big piece of this, is teaching every generation how it works, what America is, what American freedom is, and why it is wonderful, why we need to treasure it, because we want to flourish so that, biblically, we are blessed to be a blessing. We want to be free and prosperous so that we can bless the whole rest of the world, so we can export these wonderful God-given ideas to the whole world. It is a golden dream. It's why Winthrop called us a shining city on a hill. The idea that we could be that, truly free, so that people would look at us and say, that's beautiful, I would like to have that. That's the golden triangle of freedom, and that's in a nutshell who we are in the United States of America. May God help us to keep it.